Greetings, respected viewers. In this video I'm continuing my series on the Northern Irish Troubles. So I left off in 1973, the second worst year of the Troubles, with over 250 people being killed. In the last lecture I ended up talking about roadblocks, and the army set these up all over. They often had the UDR, Ulster Defence Regiment, do this because the UDR were part-time soldiers, mostly that had a great deal of training, and these were static duties, quite straightforward for them. The UDR also had boat patrols and dog patrols and so on to try and stop weapons coming in. And the British Army had a system whereby regiments would move into an area, be there for 6 months, and then be replaced by another one on a different tour. So they'd be rotated in and out. And people who stayed in the British Army for a 5-year contract would be in Northern Ireland perhaps twice in that time. So it wasn't a speciality of any regiment besides the Ulster Defence Regiment. First of all, the Irish Guards, because many of its men were Irish, were not sent there. But later on that changed, and they were, because it's felt that some of the soldiers might have divided loyalties, sympathies towards the Republicans or indeed the Loyalists. Moving on to the next thing, Bill Craig, former Home Affairs Minister of the Stormont government, he left the Ulster Unionist Party, set up his own Vanguard Party. Vanguard had been a paramilitary organisation. It wasn't illegal. He had a hard-hitting slogan, "Liquidate the enemy," though he delivered it with a total lack of panache. But in one of the UVF songs, they're mentioned saying, this song about the people of East Belfast, saying, "Side by side with Vanguard, UVF and UDA." So it's a pro-UVF song, putting Vanguard in the same category as a loyalist terrorist organisation. So he had his Vanguard Service Corps there to provide security to him at his meetings. And he toyed with the idea of Northern Ireland leaving the United Kingdom, being independent, not joining the Republic of Ireland. So they performed reasonably strongly in the mid-70s. 1978, poor election results, and the party was then wound up. Anyway, so Bill Craig, towards the end of his days, he maintained he was right to see the Civil Rights Association as being a mask for the IRA, and the IRA had got a few useful idiots to go along with them in that. So his analysis is largely bogus. Paisley's star was rising in the 70s. He seemed to be the face of unionism. As David Cameron said about him years later, Paisley was the most recognisable figure in British politics. Nationalists and Republicans saw him as really personifying unionism, and it was a rather ugly face of unionism. Furious, judgmental, denominational, if not sectarian, and many people felt he was impervious to reason. He poured scorn on Catholic doctrine. So Paisley was not just a political figure. Remember, he had his own church, and he was proselytizing for Christianity. Even in Cameroon, he had a church. So his Free Presbyterian Church had branches in various countries, including the Republic of Ireland, where they sometimes got graffitiized. So he called unionists Lundies if they thought about making significant concessions towards nationalists. However, in 1973, he did consider trying to form a coalition government with the SDLP, but it didn't happen. In the 70s, the early 70s, the UK government was keen to see political progress in Northern Ireland. Remember at the beginning, the UK government had been extraordinarily, reasonable or open to compromise when they lost control of the Falls, or they lost control of the Cregan and Bogside in Derry, not trying to get it back for about 3 years. It's hard to think of any other government in the world would do this, to be driven out without a fight, without a single soldier or RUC officer killed, up until they finally decided to come in. So the approach was to seek reconciliation and compromise, but obviously by 73 the conflict was raging. So the Conservative government in 1973 produced a white paper about an assembly in Northern Ireland to run the internal affairs of the province. Well, doesn't that sound a bit like Stormont? But it would be to be elected on a proportional basis, so the Unionists would no longer have such a healthy majority. An executive would function as the cabinet, and there must be power sharing between nationalists and Unionists. A Council of Ireland would be set up for Northern Ireland and the Republic. This was supposed to be set up according to the Treaty of 1921, but it didn't meet for various reasons. Now, the Council of Ireland could be interpreted two different ways. For Unionists, this would be a major concession they're making to Nationalists, and for them, that would be the final step. There would be no more. However, Nationalists would see it as a vehicle to move towards a united Ireland. So there were different interpretations of what this would lead to. Reform of the IUC was envisaged, but the name was still going to be kept the same. But it was only if this new Northern Ireland Assembly chose to reform the IUC, release of those who convicted of terrorist offences was not considered. So the elections went ahead, and there were white paper unionists, pro-white paper and anti-white paper unionists. And the pro-white paper unionists won, perhaps surprisingly. They won about 2/3 of the unionist vote. So the unionists were not as obdurate as they're often portrayed. The majority of them were open to significant compromise, much more so than they'd been willing to contemplate only about 4 years earlier. So it seemed to be encouraging. People were amenable to striking a deal. London and Dublin were in negotiations about this. They were in touch with the Ulster Unionists and the SDLP. But the Ulster Unionists were being denounced as quislings by Paisley. Now, Faulkner had built his reputation as a hard man of the UUP, but by 1973 he was very much open to compromise. But he faced a rival with his own party, a bald Fermanagh farmer called Harry West. And Harry West's slogan seemed to be, "Fermanagh will never stand for that." Fermanagh was a county with a nationalist majority, but the Unionists had controlled the council for quite a few years, up until 1972. And he formed the West Ulster Unionist Association, not because of his name, but because people from the west of Northern Ireland, where Unionists were in a minority and therefore less willing to make concessions, because then they would lose all power. So the Ulster Unionist Party didn't split apart into two separate parties, but was riven by squabbling over this white paper, should they accept it or not. So anyway, Sinn Féin was not contesting elections at the time, so pro-IRA people, I suppose, would vote for the SDLP if they voted at all. They might see it as just simply legitimising Northern Ireland's position within the UK. So the Loyalist terrorists made an all-out attempt to scotch this compromise by raising the level of violence. May 1974, they set off 2 big bombs in the Irish Republic, one in Dublin, one in Monaghan. Between them killed 33 people. That was the deadliest day of the Troubles. So there have been rumours that the UVF didn't do this on their own, that British government agents were there. Of course, that's completely against London's policy, who wanted compromise at this stage, but were there rogue elements of the British security services who were loyalist sympathisers who were trying to wreck any negotiations. Anyway, the IRA concluded that their campaign was bearing fruit because the UK government was making concessions which it hadn't been willing to consider a few years earlier, that they had the British on the run, and the thing was to keep up the pressure and there would be total victory. So there were quite a few IRA bombs in England, at railway stations, courthouses, shops and in pubs, killing quite a few civilians. So loyalists railed against London, saying, you know, we're being sold down the Swanee, we can't trust you, and we mustn't